Hey guys, it's Drew. Thank you for checking out the Sober Fix podcast, where we talk about addiction and living life sober, one day at a time. If you like what you hear, go ahead and follow us. And if you get some time, check out our Instagram page at the Sober Fix podcast, and also our YouTube and TikTok at the Sober Fix. Hope you enjoy the episode. Hello. Thank you, anyone tuning in. We're here, another episode of the Sober Fix podcast. And I've got another great guest on, you guys. It just never ceases to amaze me how many cool people we have in recovery. People that have been through the ringer have, you guys know my story. I was in addiction for 14 years. I was just completely strung out on heroin. And I just didn't know there was any other way to live, and I love doing this podcast, and I especially love having guests on. And we got another great one on today. We've got Jonathan Schwartz. And Jonathan, man, thank you for coming on. He is a former Hollywood financial advisor. He's a recovering addict and an advocate for recovery. And I stole this from your website, Jonathan, a redemption seeker. How you doing, Jonathan?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on this great podcast. It's an honor to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We were talking earlier before it started, and I was reading your story when Luis had sent it over to me. And man, it's a powerful one, man. I just want to kind of go to the beginning. Where did things start? Where did you grow up? Where was your childhood at?
Yeah, so I grew up in the upstate New York, the Catskill Mountains. Age 4, father left me and my family, my mother and my younger brother, and that was where my mom was ultimately. That was her crossroads. She was a young parent to begin with, and frankly didn't even really want to be a parent at that time. And not only was she a parent, but she became a single parent overnight. She's forced to take 3 jobs, put food on the table, roof over our head, clothing on our backs, and she, as a result of that, had a lot of stress. And that stress resulted in my childhood trauma. A lot of abuse, physical or emotional. Um, my mom today is my rock, because in recovery we've learned to forgive people. And I can understand, as a father of 3 adult sons, the pressure when having children at a young age. And in her situation, I get it. I don't play the victim role. I don't play self-pity. The trauma really stayed with me through adolescence and adulthood because it remained unresolved. I had all these emotions suppressed and never really connected with my emotions. And so grew up, as I said, in New York, went to 3 different colleges, a lot of a lot of instability in my life in terms of why 3 colleges and why did you live in multiple, different locations. And I don't really remember my childhood, but I do know that whatever my childhood was and how it was defined who I am today, and also contributed to my poor choices in adulthood. And I don't use that as an excuse. Those are trauma is a contributing factor. And although I made poor choices, I own it and I take the responsibility. But so after graduating college, I went to work for a CPA firm, a small sole proprietor in the financial district of San Francisco. Worked there for about 3.5, 4 years. And then I got a call from one of my cousins. So I have about 7 cousins in my family that are CPAs, all very successful in their own way. And, my cousin, when I graduated, when he called me, I said, "Are you ready to hire me now?" He said, "No, you're immature, irresponsible. I want you to work at that firm, excuse me, that you're at. When I think you're ready, I'll give you a call." So he did give me that call, and he said, "Why don't you come down to LA, come work for me?" At this point in my life, I had my first of 3 sons and my wife at the time. We drove down south, and I started to work for this particular cousin, who was very well respected as a music business manager in the entertainment space. First one in, last one to leave. I didn't want nepotism associated with me. I wanted to earn everything I could. I know that he took a risk on me having me there, and I wanted him to be proud of me. So I worked really hard. A lot of what I was asked to do was to go in the file room and read client files and understand what our responsibility as business managers are for clients. And so it was a tremendous learning experience. And then in 1999, his firm was acquired by Chase Manhattan Bank, now JP Morgan. He asked me if I wanted to get into investment banking, family wealth management. I said, "Cuz, I love you. Thank you for this opportunity and for all the knowledge that you imparted on me, and for all the opportunity, not just for myself, but you gave me and my family. And with his blessing, he let me join another firm. I took a small book of business with me. That firm in February of 2000 was called GSO Business Management. Ultimately, a few years later, I became a partner. And, for the first decade plus of my career there was no addiction. And I was able to really get, one of the best books of business that a business manager could have in terms of their client roster. And it was great. I worked with some magnificent people until my addiction started to surface in about 2010. And that's where, this great success that everyone thought from the out, as they say in the big book, right? I presented myself to the outer world living this double life. Once my addiction started, everyone still thought I was this success, but success for them was defined by the amount of money I made. That wasn't how I defined my success, because now here I am violating my client's fiduciary responsibility that I have for them. I'm embezzling money from my client because I start gambling. And that gambling addiction is what really propelled all these maladaptive choices and my criminal behavior. I embezzled millions of dollars from clients, a handful of them, not all. They were ultimately paid back, but that doesn't make what I did wrong right. The intent initially was to quote unquote borrow money from client one, and then after week one of betting on sports, I'll just pay them back. Well, week one passed. Now it's month one, month three. I'm in tremendous debt to a bookie because I'm betting every day on sports, and literally every day for 6 years. I turned my phone records over to the federal government, and they couldn't believe that I called my bookie multiple times every day for 6 years almost, just betting on sports, and really did not like gambling. I was just chasing at this point with this fantasy that I had in my active addiction, that, and most gamblers have this mindset, one of grandiosity, that it'll just take me one weekend to win those millions of dollars back, and I'll pay my clients back and no one will know, and I'll continue on in my career. Well, that didn't happen. So here I am now in uh, in 2015, when one of the clients, and I'm going to name the client simply because she went public with it, and the other clients, I want to respect their request to have their names sealed in the court documents, and I want to carry that honor on their request. So Alanis Morissette fired me around 2015, the end of 2015. She was my largest victim. 4.6 million of the 7 million I embezzled was from her. Um, and so, what happened was in 2000. Fast forward now, I'm starting in 2010. Around 2015, early 2016, I'm in Tampa Bay with Beyonce, who I also represented, and she's starting her rehearsals in Tampa Bay for the Lemonade tour. And I get a call from my former partner saying, Alanis is calling, and Alanis's business manager is calling, who, by the way, ironically, she hired my cousin that I started my career with's firm. He left Chase and reopened a new business management firm. She hired him, and he's the one that discovered my crime, or his partner did. And when they called me in Tampa Bay and my partners and asked me what was that 4.6 for, I, of course, in my active addiction, maintained my denial and my continued with my dishonesty and manipulation. And I told my partners, I made up a story in that moment that she was investing in a cannabis business. Well, I knew darn well that wasn't the truth, but once again, I was continuing to lie and be in denial. So then I had to tell Beyonce that I need to go back home to Los Angeles and deal with a personal matter. And when I came home, I was confronted by my now former partners, my partners at the time, and their attorneys. And I volunteered. I denied it in front of all of them. And I said, I'm so confident that I'm telling you the truth, I'll take a lie detector test. So I'm playing poker with them because I'm hoping they wouldn't take me up on that invitation. And unfortunately, a short time after I promised them that, I was celebrating my 23-year wedding anniversary with my wife in Santa Barbara, and my partner called me and he said, "Okay, so you said, a short while ago that you would be happy to take a lie detector test. We want you to come down to Beverly Hills on Sunday. And this was that sort of moment where I knew inevitably. I always thought inevitably I'd get caught, but this was that moment where it's done. So I said, okay, sure. I'll be happy to drive down an hour and a half from Santa Barbara to this former FBI agent polygrapher and take a polygraph test. No problem. Now, mind you, when I said that on the phone, I don't know if I could use these words on your podcast, but I was snorting cocaine. I now had a cocaine addiction um, towards the tail end of my gambling run as a way to numb myself and escape for all the wrongs that I was doing and not having the courage to ask for help. So now I'm placing my last bets. I'm using cocaine. So when I hang up the phone for the very first time now, I have to tell my wife because nobody knew this dark secret that I was keeping for 6 years. I didn't want to tell a single soul. So that made every night for 6 years really difficult to sleep. In fact, I didn't sleep for 6 years without a sleeping aid. Anytime I heard a siren, I was afraid I was going to get caught, and it was just I was in a dark place, and I wished that upon nobody. So now I get off the phone and I tell my wife, I've got to go to Beverly Hills tomorrow. Please continue to go to the spa. I'll be back, late in the afternoon, evening. We'll have a nice dinner, continue our celebration. And so I drive down the next day for the polygraph test. It happens to be May 8th, 2016, because my sober date is May 9th, 2016. And I'm placing my last bet, and I'm snorting, a whole bunch of cocaine on the way to a lie detector test. Who in their right mind thinks they're going to beat a lie detector test on a stimulant? Well, I thought I could because I Googled it, right? So I must have mastered this technique. So I go into the polygrapher's office. I'm so arrogant. And I walk in there, I put my feet up on his desk, I lay back on his chair, and I'm like, let's talk. And we were talking for a few hours. I thought it was amazing. I thought I was winning in terms of building this rapport with him. But the one thing I omitted from the Google information was they're trying to build a rapport, not you, Jonathan. They want to make you feel comfortable so that when they say, "Okay, let's go. Let me place all the things on you, the wires, and let's get going," they think that I'm in a calm, cool, collected, mind. But they don't know that this stimulant is making me shake and I'm high. So I still think I beat the test. When I leave, I call my wife and I tell her I'm heading back. And when I arrive back at the hotel, still thinking I beat this test, I couldn't reach my attorney. But shortly, I called my assistant, and she said she has access to the office, and I no longer had access on my computer to my office. So shortly after that, my attorney called me and he said, "You failed that test worse than anybody in that retired FBI agent polygrapher's career." I said, "Okay, so I'm still in deniability." I said, "What does this mean?" He said, "What it means, Jonathan, is that you're facing 23 years in federal prison. So I need to see you tomorrow and we need to discuss a strategy." There's no strategy. The strategy is I truly committed a crime. It's evident that I stole all this money. And fortunately for me, he was able to negotiate a plea agreement with the prosecution team to 4 to 6 years. I was still hoping to get a year and a half, but at sentencing on May 3rd, 2017, I'm just grateful that the judge didn't deviate from that plea agreement because she could have. And so I was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison on May 3rd, 2017. And, what happened was I went to Sheridan, Oregon federal prison camp where I took the residential drug and alcohol program and got a year off my sentence. And after 2 years there, I transferred to California federal prison at the time called Taft. And it was now COVID was hit. And so I was released 7 months earlier to be on 16 months home confinement, followed by 3 years of supervision probation. And when I came home, I thought that I was humble, and I was, but not as much as I needed to be. I took a job at Dunkin' Donuts. After a few months, they fired me because I wasn't mopping the floor or cleaning the countertops well. And I realized at that moment, my higher power was telling me that it's time for you to give back to your brothers and sisters. And so I went to addiction studies school and got my KDAC, followed it up by going to grad school to get my marriage and family therapy license with an emphasis in addiction and trauma. And so for me today, it's all about recovery because without my higher power and without my brothers and sisters in the 12 step communities, I don't think I would have changed the way I changed today. And I could honestly say that I'm proud of who I've become and who I'm becoming. And I love going to work in treatment centers every day, particularly one Altus Rehab in Encino. And I get to see people and their struggles and how they're making progress working with our entire team. And, I play a small role in that, but it brings me the best joy in my life I've ever had. And money that I once had means nothing to me because it's all gone. But the very little money I make today is really meaningful to me because it's not about money. It's about my job pays me X, and X still I still go paycheck to paycheck, but X allows me to be of service to people, and that's where I find my true contentment. And so today, I I have to just say that I'm really immersed in the 12 steps. I go to Gamblers Anonymous meetings every week, and it's this program, like I said, has just really helped me a lot.
Wow, that that is it's like I said in the beginning, it's a powerful story, man. And when I was talking about the redemption seeker, like your story is one of redemption, and I want to ask you, yeah, I think you said it though, that you started with the gambling first and then eventually that do you think the stress of it, you kind of said having to, hearing a siren and thinking the cops are coming, is that kind of what pushed you towards the cocaine? Was it kind of to deal with the stress from the gambling?
So yes, so gambling is probably the number one leading addiction correlated with suicidal ideation. So I started to experience a lot of SI because I knew inevitably I would be really destroying my kids' lives and my wife's life and my partners and my employees and the community I lived in and the entertainment space in which I worked in. And I just couldn't look myself in the mirror anymore. And I just, thankfully, I was able to identify reasons to live. Um, but that SI that I was experiencing led me to cocaine. But how the cocaine came about was in college. I probably did it once or twice a year. At this point, I considered that in moderation. Um, but one day I was at work at the office, and I asked my assistant what she did the night before, and she said she was out with her girlfriend, and they were eating at a restaurant, and waitress approached them and said, "Do you two want any cocaine?" And they said, "We don't use cocaine." And then my assistant and her friend went to the bathroom with this waitress, used cocaine. So I said, "Great story. Do you have the phone number for the waitress?"
Where were you guys exactly?
Yeah, exactly. So I did take the number down, and that person became my dealer. And frankly, it was horrible cocaine laced with chemicals and probably baking powder, and it's still it still numbed me. And it's what I needed at that time to escape my reality. And so cocaine, and then I have an addictive mind. Like I can go on Amazon and Active Addiction and buy and try and put one book in my cart because I'm just there for one book, but I put 10 books in my cart and buy them out of impulsivity and just that mindset that I had. So everything for me in active addiction had to be an extreme. There was no such thing as moderation. So that's how the cocaine started.
Yeah, interesting. I want to ask you about the substance program that you talked about, the kind of recovery program in prison. What was that like? Was that were you resistant to it at first, or were you at the point where you're like, "Look, I need to change something. I need help." Were you open to it? What was that like?
So when I was growing up, I grew up in an environment where asking for help was not a strength, it was a weakness, or at least it was a perceived weakness by me. And today I believe that asking for help, having the courage to be vulnerable and asking for help is an absolute strength. One strength I did not have during my active addiction. Um, I just wish I did have that. Things would have been very different for me. But when I started the steps before I went away, prior to being sentenced, but knowing that inevitably I was getting sentenced. I went to my sponsor and I said, I don't understand step one. I go, me, powerless and unmanageable, me? This is the ego, right? Me? And he said, schmuck, you're facing 23 years in federal prison. You don't think your life is unmanageable and you're powerless over the outcome of inevitably what the judge's sentence is going to be? And I said, you're right. Let's get started on step one. And that was for me the moment where I really started my early commitment to recovery. And I took that with me into prison. There's a lot of contraband that comes into prison. I could have used drugs, I could have gambled, but I became a nerd in prison, and I'm still a nerd today. And I say that proudly because I'm risk adverse today. I know the consequences of a relapse, and that's part what I do as a therapist today is help people have the adopt certain relapse prevention skills. But I also am proud of that. I don't believe when people come into treatment that a therapist should just focus on the dependency to alcohol or substances. What's the contributing factor for an individual? Like for myself, it was trauma. Many people that come into treatment have some form of trauma, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual, or any trauma. That likely, unless it was dealt with, is what's contributing to your addiction. So let's work on that trauma so that when you leave treatment, there is no unresolved trauma. There's no longer any suppressed emotions. You're now able to connect with your emotions and accept your emotions and feel your emotions and become vulnerable, become authentic, become transparent, and become the best version of yourself. And so that's why I love working where I work today. And that was how I started my recovery.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I was gonna ask you too, what was the amends process for you like?
So it's a great question because it's an interesting response I have, and that is I made amends when I came home to my loved ones, to certain friends, but I was prohibited under my supervised release to talk with my partners, my former partners, to my former employees, and to clients. So I could not make amends to them. Now, probation ended. I could have reached out to my former partners. One who was my biggest mentor unfortunately passed away at that time. And so I certainly couldn't make amends to him. But I did think about, and I have thought about making amends to his wife and daughter. But I've been advised that that can cause harm, and when can be caused, it's not smart to make an amends. But I think about them on a daily basis. I think about my other partners, and I think about a lot of people I hurt. But I don't live in my past, but I don't forget my past. So I've made the amends that I could make. I probably, as I reflect on an offer with my sponsor, am likely going to try and reach out to some of my handful, 5 clients or so that I embezzled from. And if they answer my call, great, I'll make amends. But as you know, we don't make amends so much for with an expectation of how the recipient's going to receive it. And at this stage in my life, I accept that I hurt people, and it's okay if they don't. It's more important for me that I'm authentic with the amends, and so that I can move on to know that I tried my best in making those amends.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. And I was gonna ask you too, you mentioned your relationship with your sponsor. How important is that for someone who is starting their journey in recovery and let's say maybe they don't even do 12 steps, but just to have someone, some type of mentor, someone that's been through addiction. I got a comment this week from someone on YouTube and they said, man, I've been struggling and I've been miserable, but none of my friends are addicts or alcoholics. So when I try and, tell them what's going on with me, they just basically just say, oh, dude, you just need to turn it around or find some willpower or stuff like that. How important do you think it is to have either a sponsor or some type of mentor, someone you could turn to that understands the addiction as well?
Sure. And before I answer that, so for me, the 12 steps is what's saved my life. But for some people to come into treatment, they don't believe in the 12 steps. Great. That's okay. Let me give you the 2 other I'll call it secondary fellowships that exist today. There's Smart Recovery, and there's what was once called Refuge Recovery, now Dharma Recovery. The importance of having a community, a fellowship where I can go into a room and understand that the people in the room know the way my mind and brain works, and I know and understand how their brain works. And there's no judgment, and there's nothing but love and support in those rooms. And that's why for me, it's important to have a fellowship, a community. But even if someone says, I'm not interested in any three of those, okay. So like you said, and this is actually a treatment goal in therapy when you're working with clients, identify community mentors, leaders, religious, people, whether it's a rabbi, a priest, or whatever. Can you identify people in your life that you look up to? Because even though they're not sober, perhaps, but they're certainly not using substances, they might be people you can lean on and talk to. But I strongly encourage you, and what we do at Altus Rehab is we expose clients by taking them to meetings at night. And once we expose them to the various types of meetings, they find that they actually understand why it's important for their personal recovery plan. To have a sponsor to be able to call when you have high cravings, to have a sober peer network that you can call when you're having high cravings, or even if you're just struggling, to be able to call someone on your phone that you've established such a solid, healthy, sober peer network, because I do believe that's really important. And I don't expect someone to leave treatment and find a sponsor immediately, but go to 90 days, 90 meetings in 90 days. Expose yourself to more meetings. You will find someone that resonates with someone said something that resonates with you. That's the person you ask after the meeting to be your sponsor, walk you through the steps, and be there for you along your recovery journey. I really believe without a sponsor or without a sober peer network, you're just making this more complicated than it needs to be, because you want to surround yourself with healthy people in the community and healthy people outside of the community. And that goes to another treatment goal that's often talked about, which is what's the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships for the client today, right? Unhealthy relationships would be still calling your drug dealer or having him or her on your phone. Okay, remove those. Establish boundaries with anyone that's unhealthy for you, and create healthy relationships, not based on quantity of people, but quality of people. And if you can get rid of the unhealthy people in your life before you leave treatment and identify those healthy ones, combined with a sponsor and a sober peer network, at least you're giving yourself a real, probable, likely outcome of being able to maintain a sustainable recovery.
Yeah, I love that. Just at least giving yourself a good chance, and I like what you talked about community too, and kind of the goals at treatment, because I was someone who I'd go to treatment and I'd get out and I didn't really do too much after that. And what ended up happening was like you talked about with the unhealthy relationships, I thought that kind of fixed myself, and it's okay. I can go around those old friends doing the same things, and I found out the hard way, oh no, that needs to change, but I wanted to ask you, how important do you think it is for people to go to rehab, to go to treatment, but then also have continued care outside of treatment?
It's an absolute. So, I don't know what my exact percentage is, but I would say there's about 80% of the people take our suggestion for an aftercare plan, which includes, a sober living and a PHP and IOP. And, with a sober living attached to a PHP and IOP, you could stay in, because you can stay and have therapy. You can stay and go to group therapy as well as individual therapy. Because what these private facilities like ours do is we establish a strong foundation for you. Okay. After 30, 40 days, now let's go and build that foundation by living in a sober living environment, or surrounding yourself with sober peers, going to a structured IOP program where you have 3 or 4 groups a day plus therapy. Do that for 3 months, 6 months, as long as you can, right? Notwithstanding perhaps some external reasons why you have to leave. You have to get a job. You have to, your FMLA only lasted this long, or your unemployment is run out. There are extenuating circumstances where someone cannot take advantage of 3, 6 months in an IOP and sober living. So go for a month or two. Just keep honing your tools, sharpening that toolbox that you have to prevent a relapse and to deal with your mental health issues still. And so I do believe it's you just put yourself in a win opportunity if you go to an aftercare plan that includes the IOP and sober living. And if you don't, because we have clients that just don't, they have children at home, and and they have now committed to 90 meetings in 90 days. They've committed to finding a sponsor within their first week. They've committed to therapy with, because we work on the family dynamics too, because most of us in active addiction, myself certainly included, I ruptured my family dynamics. I destroyed my family life. I hurt my kids so much, and I'm still trying to earn back their trust. And I'm over 9 years sober, but that's something that we accept in recovery, and that's just to surrender to what my higher power I do, and I ask him every day to please put my two of my three kids back in my life, and accept that he's going to do that, my higher power, when it's the right time, because it's no longer Jonathan's time, and that's okay.
Yeah, and were you someone that always had a personal relationship with a higher power, or was that something you struggled with in the beginning? How was that like for you?
I had zero relationship with the higher power prior to my addiction, and when I was ready to, prior to May 9th, 2016, my sober date, I had zero relationship with a higher power. Um, and that's just because I didn't grow up religious, and I really didn't have any spirituality. And today I have a deep connection with my higher power, happens to be my God. My it's we call him Hashem. I'm Jewish, and I also have a spiritual component to my higher power. So there's both a religious and a spiritual component. But it didn't happen overnight, even in recovery. Like the first year, I thought AA was a cult. Yeah, like I'm not going to be part of this cult. And I actually called my sponsor up and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. Well, AA is not a cult. AA and other 12 steps are, as I said earlier, an incredible fellowship surrounded by a community that understands one another and is there unconditionally to help you. And I have a huge Rolodex of people that are my sober peers. And even though I'm a therapist and even though I have all this addiction credentials, I am just as prone to waking up tomorrow morning with cravings and, God forbid, a relapse. Now, I have a strong program. If I become complacent with one single bullet point in my recovery plan, then I'm setting myself up for failure. So the fellowship, this community, my higher power today is so strong that I get messages from my higher power on a daily basis. Sometimes I know what that message is, and sometimes I don't. But I'll know what it is in the next 24 hours, and then I'll thank my higher power for bringing this message to me. It might be, hey, Jonathan, I see one of your defects of character coming to the surface. I want you to work on that today. I know that sounds corny to people who don't believe in higher power, but for me, I was, I am very much committed to my higher power and surrender daily today.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've been sober now 5 years, and there's times where I just kind of look at my life today, and then I look back to what it was, and it just trips me out. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. Do you ever get that feeling when you're sitting there and as a counselor or therapist sitting in rehab talking to these people, being able to relate to them and just looking back and going, wow, like this is so cool. How did I get here? How did I get through all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy as a therapist to work in treatment with my background because I'm just not in a therapeutic uh, session with them focused just on my academic portion of grad school. I'm combining that with my life experience with maybe the content and the story is different, but at the end of the day, at the core, their minds work like my minds. And so I'm able to establish a wonderful therapeutic rapport. I've earned their trust within the first session. And that gives me an opportunity to really do the work with them. For me, one of the things that I share with clients to do is most of us, as myself, I was in active addiction, I was a people pleaser. Even though I presented, as I said earlier, with this Superman mentality, this ego, and everyone thought I was a success, deep down inside, I was insecure, low self-esteem, low self-worth. And for me, today, what I love to do is help clients recognize the biggest tool I think I can give them in relapse prevention is self-awareness. Now that you've worked on your trauma with us, now that it's no longer suppressed, now self-awareness will allow you to feel your emotions in real time. Okay. And if you could connect, if you're aware that, let's say, for example, you're becoming anxious, now you can follow up that anxiety feeling with positive reality based self talk. And you can change that inner dialogue in your head because most people in addiction are programmed for fight or flight survival mode in in childhood. And they carry that into addiction. So if I could change that narrative and rewire the client's subconscious mind by that tool of self awareness followed by self talk, then I'm putting them in a win. I'm arming that toolbox with so many relapse prevention and life skills. So for me, it's been beautiful to uh, just be in those rooms and share my experience with them so that they know that I understand them. That's very important. But what I do is this, and I ask my clients to do this too. For my program, for my own recovery journey, I believe that for most days, because I don't believe in absolutes, but for most days, I do things that I'm proud of in each day. And I recognize that in those moments. It could be something as simple as, you know, I opened a door for an elderly man. Now, in that moment, I'll say, Jonathan, in active addiction, you may not have opened the door for that man, but today you did. So I immediately recognize the progress that I still make today in my recovery. By comparing and contrasting my pro recovery behavior today to my active addiction behavior of yesterday, shows me something measurable that I am making progress. And you know as well as I do that this program is progress, not perfection. So my clients need that too because I'm no longer insecure. I no longer have a big ego. I have a lot of humility that trumps any of my ego and certainly my isms. And of course, I have a healthy version of ego today, but that's why I'm comfortable in my own skin today. And that's what I advise clients to do. Like, be proud, recognize the things you're doing today because you probably would not have done those things the same way in active addiction. And by doing that, I hope you can start to build your confidence, build your self esteem, build your self worth, and look in the mirror and say, I love you.
Yeah, I could totally relate to that. When I first got sober, I was so uncomfortable, like you talked about, self-esteem, self-worth, self-confidence just at a complete zero. And it took kind of diving into recovery and just going day by day and just like you talked about, maybe opening the door for someone or maybe getting involved in service and just focusing on what can I do today to feel just a little bit better, and I found as time went on, I started to feel a lot better, because I finally was. It's like you mentioned, it was just my life today is much different than it was in addiction. And I really like that you measure that and you kind of say, hey, look, this is what I'm doing today. This is definitely something I wouldn't have done when I was out there in active addiction. So I might have to steal that tool, kind of measuring the the difference.
Absolutely take it. It works.
I want to ask you about Gamblers Anonymous. How has that whole process been for you?
So that's my home group right now is Gamblers Anonymous every Tuesday night. I was the Los Angeles intergroup co-chairman of the entire Los Angeles Gamblers Anonymous district for a year when I came home. And I became a secretary for Los Angeles intergroup for a year commitment as well. And I recently ended my 8 month commitment at my home group because it's, someone else deserves that chance. I'm a sponsor to many people in substance use as well as in gambling. And it's like you said earlier, just being of service, but I also have to be of service to myself. Like I also I can improve upon my self-care. I lack a strong self-care program. I would like to go to the gym. I used to go to the gym. I used to cycle. I used to run. But, I just find myself immersed in work. And as much as I love it, I do need to give myself self-care because I don't want to burn out. And self-care, as you know, is an important part of one's recovery plan. So I'm committed to doing a light workout here and there starting in this week, and we'll see. I'll probably feel a lot better. I'll probably get better sleep. So, all these things are important for me. Um, and I can recognize when I have something that I need to improve upon. I mean, there's a lot I do need to improve on. I'm far from perfect, but this program allows me to do a daily inventory of myself, step 10, and I do it. And except I just do it in real time. I don't do it particularly in the morning or night. I do it in real time because I have such strong self-awareness that I can see when my defects of characters from the past might be surfacing. And as I said earlier, I'm probably getting a message from my higher power at the same time. So yeah, being in Gamblers Anonymous, I reacclimated myself with the same group of men and women that I had a relationship with before I went away, and they welcomed me back with open arms when I returned. And it's my favorite night of the week, to be honest. And I say this to the clients too. Like my favorite night of the week, without a doubt, is going to my Gamblers Anonymous meeting. And if I miss it, for whatever the reasons are, I'm disappointed because I miss seeing my brothers and sisters. They deserve to be heard. So me showing up as another person in the room that is actively listening to them share whatever their struggles or good things might be. And when it's my turn to share, I know they're actively listening as well to me. And hopefully something I say can resonate to a newcomer. And so there's no better night for me than that.
That's funny you say that, and I'm thinking as I'm listening to you, a lot of the stuff that I enjoy today, whether it's meetings or any type of kind of sobriety, recovery related stuff, in the very beginning when I first got sober, like going to a meeting for me felt like a chore. Like it felt like it was something I had to do, and it was just so hard, and I didn't know anyone. And it's funny that you say that because now I look forward to that kind of stuff today. So it's interesting that sometimes the things that we have to do in the beginning that may be hard for some people, we end up coming to enjoy it. So I'm glad that you talk about that.
Yeah, it's like getting comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I choose to use the word like I don't have to do anything. I don't have to go to the meeting. I don't have to do this or that. Instead of using the words have to, I say I get to. Like I get to go to the meeting. That's a privilege. Like I get to have food in my refrigerator today. That's a privilege, and I have a lot of humility around that. Like I live paycheck to paycheck, dollar to dollar. I have a greater relationship with money today than when I had high net worth in my former career. Today, I have a healthy relationship. I'm on a budget. I help people struggling in the recovery program with their finances, particularly those in Gamblers Anonymous. I mean, the Gamblers Anonymous rooms are just filling so quickly with the legalization of gambling. It's sad. Yeah, it's not just on sports. It's not just in casinos. It's day trading. It's cryptocurrency markets. This is really hurting a lot of people. And when you're dealing with a person's money, uh, that can really hurt. That can lead to, as I said earlier, for myself, SI, and also just the destruction of their relationship with people. And that's in any addiction, right? We hurt so many people, and I hope people can recognize that. And they usually get it. They don't get it in the first few months of their recovery, perhaps, in treatment, but they eventually get it. And they know the people that they hurt. And so that was a weird face I was making. So yeah, so I really believe that I still have a lot of people in my life, not a lot, quality people in my life. And those that aren't, I want to earn their trust back. If they're willing to observe my actions today and not believe what comes out of my mouth, because the person they knew before was one who was dishonest and manipulative. But today, I don't want you to trust words that I say today. I want you, if you want to get to know me, please observe me. Please observe me on a daily basis. And I think you'll see a different person, a person that now you might want to be a part of his life to some degree. And if they're healthy for me, then they'll be invited into my quality inner circle of people. And if they're not healthy for me, or I'm not healthy for them, that's okay. Then they're not in my quality inner circle, and I accept that. I'm no longer a people pleaser.
Yeah, and I had people pleasing. That was part of mine as well. And when you mentioned earlier, kind of trying to keep, I just tried to always keep everything on the outside, like make it seem like it's okay, even though I was struggling on the inside. And I had a hard time for a lot of years asking for help. There were times where I got lucky and I ended up getting into some type of recovery, whether it was a meeting or some type of group, and I had a hard time just raising my hand and saying, "Look, I'm not doing well." And people would say, "Hey, man, you're back. How are you doing?" I'd say, "Oh, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good." Was it hard for you to open up in the beginning, or were you just ready? What was that like in the very beginning? Kind of sharing with people what was going on with you.
It was hard. I mean, the guys in and girls and women, excuse me, in Gamblers Anonymous will tell you, if you for those of newcomers in the meeting, that I cried for the first 3 months at meetings because inevitably I knew I was going to prison. So I went there with, in that very dark place and time of my life, and so sharing though wasn't difficult for me because I had already dealt with my trauma. So I still was connected to my emotions now. I started this connection with myself now, and I'm I shared then the same way I share today. I speak from my heart. I don't think about what I'm going to say when it's my turn. Whatever my heart and soul is feeling, that's what I share. I hope it could resonate with someone. A lot of people in early recovery struggle with social anxiety. What I share with them is there's no better place to work on decreasing that social anxiety than a room filled with people who understand you. You already know it's a safe place, but there are a lot of people that definitely have, coming into early recovery, that struggle with social anxiety. It's very common. So go to the meetings, speak up, say, say something. Just even if you say, my name is X and I'm 6 days sober, great. You said something. And the more you say one little thing, one sentence, the more you'll start really sharing and opening up more. And you'll see the amazing support and love that's outpouring from your brothers and sisters and your sober peers.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice. I was shocked when I finally started to raise my hand. I finally started to share. In my head, I thought, "Oh man, they're going to be laughing. They're going to say they don't relate, this and that." And next thing you know, it just the relief of after holding something in for so many years, and kind of the secret that you talked about, where I'm living a lie and I'm trying to keep up with it, and I wouldn't share for so long, and then I finally got in a room of people like you mentioned that actually understand. They understand. Another thing that you mentioned earlier too, and I really like this. I'll just highlight this. I love that you mentioned we have different kind of situations. So maybe our addiction looked a little bit different, but I think something that we can all relate to is just the way that we felt. At least the loneliness, or just the having to keep up with the lie, or having to look over the shoulder. And do you feel like we all have different stories, but at least a lot of feelings that we can relate to?
Absolutely, because I think our different stories end up coming full circle back to the commonality, right? Which is why, like, I don't like to talk about war stories when I'm asked to speak at a meeting, because if we talk about the war stories, it's not it's yes, that may be part of our experience, but let's focus on the our experience, of course, but let's also really emphasize our strength and hope, because we all have similar stories. It's just a little bit, it's just different. It's a different, like, I embezzled money. Maybe someone used to drink all day at the bar and throw up at night. Okay, that's your story. But yet our brains still operate with great deal of commonality, regardless of the differences in our, call it, in detailed story, right? There's no other place in this planet you could find this commonality but a room filled with sober peers.
Yeah, and I had the feeling when I was finally surrounded by people that understand. I just had this feeling of, "Oh, I made it," because for so long I used to talk to people that kind of just were normal drinkers. They were my friends, and they kind of they had the stop button. They didn't live a super risky life. They'd maybe drink a couple nights, and then they'd say, "You know what? I'm good. We just drank all weekend. I'm done. And it could come Monday, and I couldn't turn it off. But it was nice to finally be around people that understood. Jonathan, I want to ask you at 9 years sober today, how do you keep recovery a priority? How do you keep it fresh? How do you keep up the motivation for it? What kind of helps you just continue to grow and continue to want to live this kind of lifestyle?
It's recognizing the negative consequences of a relapse. So for me, and I'll share in details. This is absolutely what I share with clients. I ask clients, another relapse prevention tool is, you as the author of your negative consequences, write down on a piece of paper what those negative consequences are. Put them in your wallet. Put them in your purse, male or female, respectively, or whatever. Because in the moment that you're craving, use alcoholics as an example. You go into a grocery store and there's 15 aisles. About 3 of those aisles are filled with alcohol. So now you're starting to romanticize with alcohol and your intense cravings. It's very difficult to pick up that 500-pound phone and call your sponsor or sober peers. What's not difficult is pulling out of your wallet your negative consequence list. Because if it was written by you and it's incredibly powerful, the likelihood of you relapsing is remote. So for me, my negative consequences are ingrained in my head. Here they go. 1, I would disappoint my higher power if I relapsed. 2, I would disappoint the pride that I take in my recovery. 3, the likelihood of earning back 2 of my 3 beautiful sons' relationships, likely unhappy, likely not going to happen. 4, my mother's been battling over a decade stage 4 lung cancer. Do you think I want to cause her stress? How that would accelerate the cancer cells? Absolutely not. 5, I'd lose my job. And 6, I might be homeless. There's no shot of me relapsing with those negative consequences. Now, when I say shot, I'm not saying that with arrogance. I'm saying that with humility. Like, I put myself in a win position by being risk adverse and knowing that if, God forbid, I have a craving here or there, I better remember my negative consequences. So that's what keeps me motivated. Trying to repair relationships with my children, trying to better myself on a daily basis, trying to speak to my mom every day and telling her I love her and I'm so happy that she's been beating this disease for as long as she has, for being grateful for so many things in my life. This sobriety has afforded me, single word, freedom.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to my next question. I know you mentioned earlier kind of making less money than you did before, but do you think the thing that makes it so worth it, like even if I'm making less money, do you think it's just the freedom of just not having to worry anymore? Like not having, you mentioned the hearing the sirens and getting worried or not having to look over your shoulder. Is that freedom that you just mentioned, do you think that's what just makes it so worth it, this type of life?
Absolutely. And I still have worry, I still have stress, but I know how to cope with it. I don't catastrophize. I don't future trip. I don't negative think. But maybe one day I do catastrophize over something. I'm a human being, but I have the tools to course correct that, as I said earlier, my inner dialogue. And so I'm able to really change that dialogue in real time. So I still am anxious, but yeah, what sobriety affords me to have a job. Sobriety affords me the opportunity to earn back the trust of my loved ones. Sobriety affords me of allowing myself to be humble today. And sobriety affords me the opportunity to be of service to others and so many other things. Like I took for granted so much in my active addiction, just the little things in life. Like I'm grateful that I'm here and I'm able to drink a cup of coffee, right? I mean, I don't take that lightly. I'm grateful that I have a dog waiting for me to pet him when this podcast is over. These are things that I'm grateful that I woke up and I could breathe oxygen and I have another day to try and be sober. So there's so much to be grateful for me in sobriety, and that's what I mean by freedom.
Yeah, yeah, I could totally relate to that as well. I want to ask you, I've had you here almost an hour. I got two more for you. The relationships, strained relationships. I know when I first got sober, there were some bridges that were just so burnt. And I know you talked about kind of improving relationships with your kids. You improved relationships with your mom. What is your advice to someone who has just gotten sober and they just want so badly to have those, whether it's relationships with their kids, and but it's going to take time, you know? What would your advice be to them? What should they focus on? How do they mend those relationships eventually over time? Is it, do they just keep recovery a priority? What do you think's going to help them in the long run?
Well, recovery for sure has to be their number one priority because if you're sober, is a positive ripple effect on all areas, including the repairing of relationships to those that you hurt. So now it starts with taking ownership and holding yourself accountable for how your behavior, your addiction impacted your family and impacted your loved ones. So if you could do that, you also then, I encourage you to become patient because it doesn't work on your timeline. It's not going to. So I'm gonna invite you to have patience. I'm gonna invite you to do the next right thing. I'm gonna invite you to not be defensive and learn healthy communication skills with whomever you're trying to earn back the trust with. Show active listening skills. Show that you can communicate maturely without being that defensive person that you were in active addiction. And just tell people how your loved ones how much you love them, and tell people that you know you could use their support in their recovery and you want to earn back their trust. And honestly, say I'm sorry for all the hurt that I've caused. I recognize that today, and I didn't recognize that in active addiction. And that support that I get from my loved ones is unconditional and it's invaluable. So it's just really about surrendering, living with humility, being patient, and most importantly, recognizing, because a lot of people in early addiction, they're in denial that they hurt their loved ones. Once you can accept that and take that personal accountability, now you could begin sort of utilizing the tools that the 12 step affords us: patience, acceptance, honesty, and healthy communication. And if you could do that with your loved ones, you put yourself in a position, again, not in your timeline, but at some point in the unknown future, they'll come back into your life.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. And when you're talking about denial, I didn't realize. I remember thinking when I was in the middle of addiction, I remember thinking, man, why don't these people just get off my back? This is my life. This is my decisions. It's affecting me. And as time went on and I finally went to treatment and I got sober and I was living each day sober, and my thinking started to change a little bit. And I started to look back, and the way that I really realized it was I had friends that I met in meetings, and they were doing good for a while. We became good friends, and then I watched them go out, and it was painful to watch people go back out. That's when I kind of realized, wow, like I see how much I was affecting other people now as they kind of watch me get well, go back out, disappear, go back to jail, relapse, whatever it was. I want to ask you, Jonathan, what is next for you? Do you have any goals or plans for the next couple years, kind of in sobriety, or whether it's professional goals, whatever it is?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have a book out within less than a year. I'm gonna have a movie that follows, and I want to be the male version of Brene Brown and help men particularly learn to be vulnerable and have the courage to ask for help and to be transparent. And so I'm going to tour the world with a book and a movie, and it's going to disrupt the entertainment space, and it's going to help people in recovery, and it's also going to show me being doing a lot of things that I'm not proud of, but um, I think that's part of my story. And the redemption, as you mentioned earlier, is a big part of my story, and all things in between. So I think I'll have a number one New York Times bestseller out there, and I think it's going to be a great Netflix series. And I think that it's going to be another way of me being of service, is to tour the world and impart my wisdom and my experience, strength, and hope.
Yeah, I can tell you right now, that's going to be a good book
Thank you.
with your story and everything you've been through. And I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you taking the time to come on here. Such powerful stuff. I just keep seeing that word redemption, redemption. You know, I think your story is, it's one of hope, it's one of transformation, and it tells people, look, you can change your life no matter what you did before, whether it's embezzling money, doing heroin, doing cocaine, whatever the case. you can turn things around, So I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate you taking the time, being so open and vulnerable with us and honest, So I appreciate you, Jonathan. Thank you, brother. Oh, let me ask you real quick before we stop. If someone wants to follow you, where do they find you at?
So I have Instagram account at the real Jonathan Schwartz.
At the real Jonathan Schwartz.
Yes.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, you made it through another episode. Thanks again, and if you'd like to collaborate or come on the show, please email me at thesoberfixpodcast@gmail.com. Have a great day.